Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, May 6, 2024. Hamas says it has accepted a ceasefire deal proposed by Egypt and Qatar to stop the war with Israel in Gaza, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the agreement is far from Israel's essential demands. Columbia University cancels its main commencement ceremony over the weeks of pro-Palestinian protests on campus. Russia announces it will conduct military exercises near Ukraine on the possible use of tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons. The judge in the Donald Trump hush money trial in New York City holds him in contempt of court for a 10th time for violating a gag order and making disparaging comments about the jury. The judge issues a fine of $1,000 and warns Donald Trump that further violations could result in his spending time in jail. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, announces he's going to run for a fourth six-year term, saying in a video that the November election is the most important national election of our lifetime. This could be the week that Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene forces a vote on whether to remove Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. We'll hear about it from Wall Street Journal congressional reporter Natalie Andrews. Education Department announces an outreach to get more prospective college students to complete the federal student aid applications known as FAFSA. Vice President Kamala Harris is in Detroit talking about the economy, and President Joe Biden awards the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy to the U.S. Military Academy's football team. From Associated Press, Hamas announced Monday it has accepted an Egyptian-Qatari proposal for a ceasefire to halt the 7-month-long war with Israel in Gaza, hours after Israel ordered about 100,000 Palestinians to begin evacuating from the southern city of Rafah, signaling that a long-promised ground invasion there could be imminent. Hamas issued a statement saying its supreme leader had delivered the news in a phone call with Qatar's prime minister and Egypt's intelligence minister. The announcement came hours after Israel ordered the Palestinians to begin evacuating the southern Gaza town of Rafah ahead of the Israeli military operation. Israel says Rafah is Hamas's last stronghold. News of Hamas's announcement sent people in Rafah cheering in the streets. Some of the reporting from Associated Press. The White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby reacted at the White House briefing.
There has been a response from Hamas to the hostage deal. We're currently reviewing that response, and we're discussing it with our partners in the region. Director Burns, as you know, is there, and he's working this in real time on the ground. I won't be able to comment any further on this until we know where things stand. I hope you can understand that. I know everybody's curious about what's in this response, what the Israeli reaction to it is. I'm just not going to get ahead of the process. We want to get these hostages out. We want to get a ceasefire in place for 6 weeks. We want to increase humanitarian assistance. And the last thing that I want to do is say anything at this podium that's going to put that process at risk. Regardless, as we've said before, we still believe that reaching an agreement is the absolute best outcome, not only for the hostages, but for the Palestinian people. And we're not going to stop working to that outcome. Now, as you know, the president talked with Prime Minister Netanyahu this morning. The call lasted about 30 minutes and was constructive. The president reaffirmed his message on Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day. The two leaders discussed the shared commitment of Israel and the United States to remember the 6 million Jews who were systematically targeted and slaughtered in the Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history, and to forcefully act against anti-Semitism and all forms of hate-fueled violence. Now, of course, the two leaders spoke about our efforts to secure the hostage deal, including through these ongoing talks today. During the call, at the president's urging, Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed to ensure that the Kerem Shalom crossing is back open for humanitarian assistance for those in need. And I also want to take a moment to address the latest reports now out of Rafah, which was also a topic of discussion on the call. I'll reiterate again that we cannot and we will not speak for IDF operations, but we've made clear our views about operations in Rafah that could potentially put more than 1 million innocent people at greater risk. During his call with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the president again made this clear. He also made clear that we continue to believe that the hostage deal is the best way to avoid that sort of an outcome while securing the release of those hostages. And as I said, those conversations continue.
The White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby at today's White House briefing. Although he said he could not give more information, reporters did try.
Noting your caveats at the top, are you able to say whether Hamas was agreeing to something that had been discussed over the last several days?
Again, without getting into the details of it, and Director Burns is still talking to partners about this, there have been ongoing negotiations and talks here for weeks. And the director traveled recently to see if we can't bring this thing home. And again, without speaking about the details of the response by Hamas, I think it's safe to conclude that that response came as a result or at the end of these continued discussions that Director Burns was part of.
And when do you think you'll have a better sense of what is happening? When will you get a readout from Director Burns? Later today, early tomorrow?
I don't know. The president has been briefed on the response. He's aware of where the situation and where the process is. What you're asking me is like, when are we going to get like a final,
What is the answer?
final table slap here. There's a process that has been worked in the past and will be worked this time. You get a response by Hamas. We're going to have to evaluate that. We're going to see what's in it. Certainly, the Israelis must have a chance to look at this and to evaluate it. And Director Burns, as we speak, literally as you and I are talking, are having these conversations with partners in the region. It would be great. I'm sure we'd all like to have an answer as soon as possible, but I just don't want to get ahead of that process.
John Kirby, the White House National Security Communications Advisor in the White House briefing room. Associated Press reporting later in the afternoon, Israeli leaders have approved a military operation into the Gaza Strip city of Rafah, and Israeli forces are now striking targets in the area, officials announced Monday. The move came hours after Hamas announced it accepted an Egyptian-Qatari ceasefire proposal. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said the proposal was far from Israel's essential demands, but that it would nonetheless send negotiators to continue talks on a ceasefire agreement. That was from AP. Story from Axios over the weekend. The Biden administration last week put a hold on a shipment of U.S.-made ammunition to Israel. Two Israeli officials told Axios it's the first time since the October 7th attack that the U.S. has stopped the weapons shipment intended for the Israeli military. The incident raised serious concerns inside the Israeli government and sent officials scrambling to understand why the shipment was held. Israeli officials said the White House declined to comment. That's the reporting from Axios. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said during the start of the Holocaust Remembrance Day events in Jerusalem that Israel will, if necessary, conduct the war against Hamas on its own.
80 years ago, in the Holocaust, the Jewish people were totally defenseless against those who sought our destruction. No nation came to our aid. Today, we again confront enemies bent on our destruction. I say to the leaders of the world, no amount of pressure, no decision by any international forum will stop Israel from defending itself. As the Prime Minister of Israel, the one and only Jewish state, I pledge here today from Jerusalem on this Holocaust Remembrance Day, if Israel is forced to stand alone, Israel will stand alone. But we know we are not alone, because countless decent people around the world support our just cause. And I say to you, we will defeat our genocidal enemies. Never again is now.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. From BBC News, Israel's government has moved to shut down the operations of the Al Jazeera television network in the country, branding it a mouthpiece for Hamas. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the cabinet agreed to the closure while the war in Gaza is ongoing. Police raided the Qatari broadcaster's office at the Ambassador Hotel in Jerusalem on Sunday. Al Jazeera called claims it was a threat to Israeli security a dangerous and ridiculous lie. The channel said it reserved the right to pursue every legal step. That article from BBC. In Washington, the State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller asked for the U.S. response.
I want to ask you if you can just answer this straight and simply and straight about the Israeli closure of Al Jazeera. What is your response?
So we have seen the announcement from the government of Israel about closing Al Jazeera. We have made quite clear that we support media freedom all around the world, including in Israel, and that we are quite concerned about this action.
You're quite concerned about this action? Are you asking the Israelis to do anything?
So as the president said on May 3rd, journalists and media workers are an essential part of any democracy because well-informed dissent is critical to building stronger and more successful societies, and we will continue to support and advocate for free and independent media around the world. We think Al Jazeera ought to be able to operate in Israel as they operate in other countries in the region.
So you oppose?
We do.
You oppose?
We do.
Okay.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. Story from Reuters. Columbia University on Monday canceled its main university-wide commencement ceremony scheduled for May 15th in favor of smaller school-based events, a decision that follows weeks of pro-Palestinian protests that roiled the Ivy League school. Columbia said in a statement, "We have decided to make the centerpiece of our commencement activities our class days and school-level ceremonies where students are honored individually alongside their peers, rather than the university-wide ceremony that is scheduled for May 15th, calling the past few weeks incredibly difficult for our community." That was from Reuters. The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about this.
You had another school, Columbia University, announced this morning that they're canceling commencement ceremonies. I'm wondering if the White House is concerned that the situation on college campuses is not calming down, despite what the president said last week.
So I want to quote what the president said from last week, as you laid that out for me. And here's a quote: "Peaceful protest in America, violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest." And it is unfortunate that a small group of people went too far and cost their classmates this important event. We've talked about it many times from here. When it comes to commencement day and when it comes to speaking at commencement events, this is something that the president has done for some time now, and he understands that this is a moment of joy, a moment of celebration, and we feel for them. We feel for each of the graduates, and we're going to continue to reiterate the president's comments and statements and what we've said from this podium to call for protests peacefully, and that's what we're going to continue to do. But we do feel for them. These are graduates who are going to miss out on an incredibly important day of commencement.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre during her news conference in the White House briefing room. Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, posting on X, "Columbia's commencement cancellation is an unbelievable failure of leadership," after they weakly negotiated with the pro-Hamas terrorist encampment. They have lost control of the school. Hardworking students and their families will now go without this celebratory event after years of hard work. This is a disgrace, and the entire governance of Columbia has failed, the president and the entire board. That from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Returning to the State Department briefing, another topic that came up was Russia's war against Ukraine. This from the New York Times. Russia said on Monday that it would hold military exercises with troops based near Ukraine to practice for the possible use of battlefield nuclear weapons, ratcheting up tensions with the West after two European leaders raised the prospect of more direct Western intervention in the war. The order came at the start of a week of extensive publicity for Russian leader Vladimir Putin, with his inauguration scheduled for Tuesday, followed on Thursday by the annual Victory Day celebration, which commemorates the Soviet victory in World War II. Some of the reporting from the New York Times. And now the questions to the State Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller.
On Russia President Vladimir Putin will be set to start another 6-year term on Tuesday. Do you have anything on that? I understand U.S. Ambassador Tracy is currently out of the country. My question is anyone from the U.S. Embassy attending his inauguration ceremony, or is the U.S. joining other countries to boycott?
No, we will not have a representative at his inauguration.
U.S. is boycotting?
We will not have a representative there. You can draw your own conclusions. Alex, go ahead.
Does that mean that you don't consider Putin a legitimate president?
We certainly did not consider that election free and fair, but he is the president of Russia and is going to continue in that capacity.
Let me get your immediate reaction to reports about Russia's planned nuclear drills. How much does it complicate the situation, and what kind of response will that invite from the United States?
So Russia's rhetoric, nuclear rhetoric, has been reckless and irresponsible throughout this conflict. That said, we have not seen any reason to adjust our own nuclear posture and in response to these announcements, nor any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine.
State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller at his news conference in Washington. This is Washington Today. The judge in the Donald Trump hush money trial has again found Donald Trump in contempt of court and fined him another $1,000 for commenting publicly on the trial. As an AP article explains, the judge found Donald Trump had violated the gag order for comments he gave to a program called Just the News, No Noise on April 22nd, which is broadcast on Real America's Voice. On the program, Donald Trump criticized the speed at which the jury was picked and claimed it was stacked with Democrats. He is quoted as saying the jury was picked so fast, 95% Democrats, the area is mostly all Democrat. In his ruling, Judge Merchan said the comments not only called into question the integrity and therefore the legitimacy of these proceedings, but again raised the specter of fear for the safety of the jurors and of their loved ones. Defendant is hereby put on notice that if appropriate and warranted, future violations of its lawful orders will be punishable by incarceration, the judge wrote in the order, as reported by AP. Donald Trump reacted outside the courtroom in New York City.
I have to watch every word I tell you people. You ask me a question, a simple question, I'd like to give it, but I can't talk about it. Because this judge has given me a gag order and said you'll go to jail if you violate it. And frankly, you know what? Our Constitution is much more important than jail. It's not even close. I'll do that sacrifice any day. But what's happening here is a disgrace, and the appellate courts ought to get involved. New York looks so bad. The New York system of so-called justice looks so bad between this judge and Gorin and Kaplan.
Donald Trump, former president and Republican presidential candidate this year, outside the courtroom in New York City at the start of the third week of the hush money trial. Donald Trump is charged with 34 felony counts of falsifying business records as part of a scheme to cover up stories that he thought could hurt his 2016 campaign. As he made comments after today's session, he talked about what he thinks will be the length of the trial.
So we just found out the government just said that they want 2 to 3 more weeks. That means they want to keep me off the trail for 2 to 3 more weeks. Now, anybody in there would realize there's no case. They don't have a case. Every legal scholar says they don't have a case. This is just a political witch hunt. It's election interfering. And this is really, truly election interference, and it's a disgrace.
Donald Trump outside the courtroom in New York City. Washington Post writes that Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, announced Monday that he is running for re-election this year, ending months of speculation over whether the second oldest member of the Senate would retire or seek a fourth term. In a statement, Sanders, 82 years old, called the November election, which could also include a rematch between presumptive nominees, President Biden and former President Donald Trump, the most important national election in our lifetimes. That was from the Washington Post. Here's part of the video that Senator Sanders put online.
These are very difficult times for our country and the world. And in many ways, this 2024 election is the most consequential election in our lifetimes. Will the United States continue to even function as a democracy? Or will we move to an authoritarian form of government? Will we reverse the unprecedented level of income and wealth inequality that now exists? Or will we continue to see billionaires get richer while working families struggle to put food on the table? Can we create a government that works for all of us? Or will our political system continue to be dominated by wealthy campaign contributors? These are just some of the questions that, together, we need to answer, and that I look forward to discussing with you on the campaign trail. Once again, thank you very much for the support that many of you have given me in the past. As I enter this campaign, I look forward to your continued support.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, the final minute of an 8-minute video in which he announces he is running for re-election this year. He talks about his work on health care costs, veterans issues, Vermont issues, and also mentions the war between Israel and Hamas. Story from Fox News earlier today that House Speaker Mike Johnson expected to meet privately one-on-one with Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene amid speculation that she may trigger a motion to remove him from his post. Over a month ago, Green filed a motion to vacate, accusing the Louisiana Republican of having betrayed the confidence of the House Republican Conference by ushering through a bipartisan $1.2 trillion federal funding bill to avoid a partial government shutdown. That was the start of the Fox News article, and there was video circulating online of Congresswoman Green, Republican from Georgia, walking into the Speaker's office. C-SPAN spoke this morning with Wall Street Journal congressional reporter Natalie Andrews about why Congresswoman Green and her supporters want to remove Speaker Johnson.
They will say three things. So the detractors, which is not a ton of people right now. There's 3 people signed on to this motion to vacate. So they point to the appropriations process, which frustrated them. They felt like Johnson didn't hold true to what he said he was going to do when he became Speaker. Then they point to the FAFSA reauthorization. They wanted an amendment on there being a warrant for all searches, and Johnson was the deciding vote against that, and that upset them. And then they point to the aid bill, the $95 billion in aid, which included a hefty portion for Ukraine, which Marjorie Taylor Greene has said all along that if Ukraine aid comes to the floor for a vote, she will be executing a motion to vacate. So those 3 things are what a lot of detractors and critics. There's kind of 2 groups. You have the people that have signed on the motion to vacate, and then you have a group of critics who, if asked to vote for Johnson on the floor, would they do it? Maybe, maybe not.
One of those critics, it seems, is the head of the House Freedom Caucus, Bob Good. He made comments on this attempt over the weekend. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say.
Yeah.
If she were to move forward, though, again, I doubt that, because I think she's been hearing, as the rest of us have back in our districts, that the time to have a speaker battle is in November after the election. Let's focus on expanding the House majority, winning back the Senate, reelecting President Trump. But if she were to move forward, there would be a motion to table it. In other words, a vote on whether or not to move forward with a vote to vacate the speaker. I think that would likely fail. I don't think we would end up having a vote on whether or not to remove the speaker, actually.
So you sound like a no. That sounds like a no from you. Okay, but Congressman Thomas Massie. Well, go ahead, Congressman.
Well, I just want to clarify, just because you don't believe that it is time to take this action now with a 2 or 3 vote margin, much more narrow than a year ago when she was vehemently criticizing those of us who challenged the speaker back in January or voted to remove the speaker in October, when we had a 9-vote majority and we weren't 6 months away from an election. And it's interesting that none of those 8 who were part of it, none of us who were part of that, are calling for this action now, because we realize it's much more dangerous, more reckless, more risky to do it now.
So that's Bob Good from yesterday. He seemed to take a both sides approach when it comes to that. What did you get from that?
I mean, I think these folks that did vote to oust, were key in ousting McCarthy, have really faced blowback. He's not wrong about that. There's several that are facing primary challengers, including Bob Good. They're in an interesting place in the conference, and so they aren't fans of it. Now, there's the question of whether Johnson survives another day right now, but it seems like the real question is who do they elect to be Speaker or lead their party in January. That is mostly what the detractors are saying. Now is not the time.
You said there were 3 people leading this effort, Marjorie Taylor Greene being one of them, Tom Massie being one of them.
Massie and then Gosar.
And what
from
unites
Arizona.
them? Is it just general dislike for Johnson, or are there other issues there?
It seems angst and some process issues. Massie is big on process. He likes certain things to go the way he feels that they should, and Massie's objections came tied to process. It was over FAFSA, I believe, is when he joined on, and then Gosar joined on shortly thereafter.
How is it that the Democratic Party in the House is now supporting Speaker Johnson and keeping him in the position?
You know, they want to not deal with another 3 weeks of chaos. They feel like the man who did what they asked, they said all along, and that's why it makes this different than when McCarthy was ousted. Democrats are willing to vote with the motion to table, as Good noted. The motion to table is likely to pass, and so then the motion to vacate vote will likely not happen, because Democrats have said they will support the motion to table because they said, hey, if you put Ukraine aid on, if you do these things we're asking, we know that's putting your job at risk. We will help you out. And that's never happened before. And some Democrats wanted to do it for Speaker McCarthy. But it's different in that McCarthy had burned a lot of bridges And Democrats felt like they had tried to extend trust to him. That had been burned several times. With Johnson, they didn't know him as well. He's unknown, but he's done so far. It's very transactional. He's done so far what they asked. They would vote for this motion table. If it comes up again and again, I would expect their patience to wane.
Natalie Andrews, Wall Street Journal congressional reporter on C-SPAN's morning program, The Washington Journal. Tonight, New York State Democratic State Senator Tim Kennedy, who won a special election in New York's 26th congressional district, the Buffalo area, on April 30th, will be sworn in. He'll fill the seat of former Democratic Congressman Brian Higgins, who resigned. After that, the House will have 217 Republicans, 213 Democrats, and 5 vacancies. And a note about the Senate, not in session today. Senators are back Tuesday to continue work on a bill to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration for 5 years. Dozens of amendments have been proposed. How many will be allowed to be offered is yet to be seen. And current FAA reauthorization expires this Friday, May 10th. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Kayla from C-SPAN. Imagine 45 years ago when there was just a handful of television networks. C-SPAN first went on the air bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Greta from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of our 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and also on the C-SPAN Now mobile app, which is free. The U.S. Department of Education, writes West Virginia News, has launched a multi-million-dollar program aimed at encouraging more students to complete their free application for federal student aid, FAFSA, forms. The FAFSA student support strategy will provide up to $50 million in funding to support organizations with demonstrated experience expanding college access and enrollment in hopes of seeing more high school students complete the 2024-25 FAFSA, according to a press release. U.S. Department of Education's new program is a response to technical issues with the newly redesigned FAFSA application process that has left countless students across the country unsure of the amount of financial assistance they will be able to get to help pay for college. That was from West Virginia News. The Education Department held a teleconference today, and on that call, the Undersecretary for Education, James Cavall.
The FAFSA application has been available on a 24/7 basis since January 8th, and we've now received almost 9 million FAFSA submissions. The students who complete a FAFSA today can expect their records to be sent to colleges within 1 to 3 days, and schools are receiving records that are a reliable basis for colleges to make financial aid offers. And in fact, we know that most colleges are now sending out aid offers, according to the surveys that I've seen. We're continuing to make improvements to make this process as smooth as possible for all students. Last week, we streamlined the FAFSA process for applicants and contributors who lack Social Security numbers. These are primarily students' parents and spouses who contribute to the cost of college, and also a small number of students who live in the freely associated states. Some of these individuals have been delayed due to the process of creating a studentaid.gov account, and they can now enter their tax information manually and submit a FAFSA even while this process remains ongoing. Today, we'll be releasing additional tips and tools for these contributors, such as how to reestablish a studentaid.gov account if you're experiencing challenges connecting to the FAFSA form. So any students who've been waiting to fill out a FAFSA need to know that now is the time to fill it out. And that's what today's call is about. We're making national efforts to engage new and returning students to complete the 2024-25 FAFSA form. To the colleges, states, high schools, college access advisors, and many others who are now encouraging students to submit to FAFSA, thank you, and please keep it up.
Education Department's Undersecretary James Cavall on a teleconference today. Senator Deb Fischer, Republican from Nebraska, reposted today on X a part of a speech that she gave on the Senate floor last week about FAFSA.
So how'd we get to this point? I would say, in short, it's due to political pandering. The Department of Education put FAFSA on the back burner because they wanted to prop up President Biden's, his flashy student loan cancellation scheme. And we know all about that scheme in my state of Nebraska. Nebraska Attorney General Mike Hilger spearheaded the Biden v. Nebraska Supreme Court challenge to the president's $400 billion student loan giveaway. The proposal was nonsensical, and it was deeply, deeply unfair. It forced American taxpayers to bear the burden of loans that they never took out.
Senator Deb Fischer, Republican from Nebraska. Story from the Detroit News, the Biden administration will provide $100 million for small and medium-sized auto parts manufacturers to upgrade their facilities and train their workforce, according to the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris expected to announce the move Monday during a visit to Detroit. The funds are the latest in a series of recent investments and initiatives meant to spur a transition to electric vehicles. That preview from the Detroit News. Here's part of the Vice President's remarks.
I am proud to announce we are investing $100 million in small and medium-sized auto supply companies, many of which are Black-owned and based right here in Michigan. These grants will allow businesses to upgrade production and production lines to produce parts for electric vehicles. I am also pleased to announce the launch of a new program that will match government-backed loans with private equity capital to help small and mid-sized auto suppliers access loans from $250,000 to $10 million. The strength of America's economy is also based on the strength of America's supply chains. We all learned that in the pandemic if we weren't clear before. This investment will help to keep our auto supply chains here in America, which strengthens America's economy overall, and keep those jobs here in Detroit. We are also expanding access to government contracts. At the beginning of our administration, President Joe Biden and I pledged to increase federal contracts for minority-owned small businesses by 50%, knowing that traditionally and historically, folks didn't necessarily have access to the relationships to get those contracts. And we are on track to meet our goal by the end of next year, which means thousands more minority entrepreneurs with contracts worth hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars, contracts which can last up to 5 years with the option to renew for 10, 20, and 30 years.
Vice President Kamala Harris, part of her remarks today in Detroit. The Gallup polling company, with a press release that reads, with Americans less optimistic about the state of the U.S. economy than they have been in recent months and concern about inflation persisting, their confidence in President Joe Biden to recommend or do the right thing for the economy is among the lowest Gallup has measured for any president since 2001. But Biden is not alone in facing a skeptical public, as Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, The Republican and Democratic leaders in Congress and presumptive presidential nominee Republican Donald Trump garner confidence ratings below 50%, part of the press release today from Gallup. On Wall Street, the Dow up 176, NASDAQ up 192, S&P up 52. American Social Security benefits, writes CNN, will be slashed in 2035 if lawmakers don't act to address the pending shortfall, according to an annual report released Monday by the Social Security trustees. That's 1 year later than previously forecast. The combined Social Security trust funds, which help support monthly payments to the elderly, survivors, and people with disabilities, are expected to be exhausted in 11 years. After that, payroll tax revenue and other income sources will only be able to cover 83% of the benefits owed. Meanwhile, Medicare's financial condition improved even more. It is expected to be able to cover scheduled inpatient hospital benefits until 2036, 5 years later than last year's progression, according to the trustees' report. That from CNN. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, writes Scripps News, has lifted the requirement for hospitals to report COVID-19 hospitalization data to the Department of Health and Human Services. Effective May 1st, the CDC says reporting by hospitals of COVID-19 hospital admissions, hospital capacity, or hospital occupancy data is no longer a mandate. This comes as COVID hospitalizations hit a record low. CDC Director Dr. Mandy Cohen was interviewed today by Michael Milken, chair of the Milken Institute, at an institute conference in Los Angeles.
One of the things that really struck the group I brought there was your situation room. They think there's situation rooms at the Pentagon or at the White House, but the situation room monitoring things all over the world, and there are actually people at the CDC that in any emergency have their bags packed to go. So let's talk about the view of the CDC that you could share with us today.
Sure. Well, CDC is, our mission is to protect health and improve lives. And we are a small but mighty team, and I will say that it is something where it has to be a team sport. We're doing a lot of that work, and we do have a lot of visibility, but we wouldn't have that visibility unless we had partners to make sure that we have eyes, ears, people to be able to respond to whatever the health threat is. And we've made a lot of progress over the course of COVID. I think going into that, we did not have the visibility we wanted. We didn't have the diagnostic capability. We've made a lot of strides, but we have more work to do. And I want to make sure that folks who are thinking about how do we keep our economy strong, how do we keep our workforce healthy, that they think about CDC and public health at large. And because if we don't invest foundationally in our health security, everything else can get shaky on top of that. And so what we're trying to do at CDC is help folks understand how we are moving into this new moment, learning the lessons of the past, turning our data into action more quickly, communicating clearly, and making sure we're investing in those core capabilities. But again, we need everyone's help in this because we know that protecting health and improving lives, that's a big job. And so I'm grateful for this conversation and these kinds of forums to be able to do that.
CDC Director Dr. Mandy Cohen at a Milken Institute conference in Los Angeles. Story from military.com. National security-related executive branch officials would have to notify the president and Congress no more than 24 hours after they are incapacitated by an emergency medical issue under a bill approved by the House on Monday that was inspired by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's secret hospitalization earlier this year. The bill passed by voice vote. On the House floor, here's Congresswoman Jennifer Kiggins, Republican from Virginia.
At a time when our nation is facing threats around the world, we cannot afford for those who are critical to America's national security to disappear without explanation and a clear delegation of their responsibilities. As someone who served in the armed forces for nearly 10 years, I was alarmed by reports back in January that those at the highest levels in the chain of command were not informed when Secretary of Defense Austin required an unexpected leave of absence due to health challenges. For days, essential members of the National Security Council, including the president, were left in the dark regarding his status, causing a serious breach of command and control that is the bedrock of America's defense supremacy. I'm concerned for Secretary Austin's health and wish him well. However, the Department of Defense's lack of transparency surrounding his absence is very concerning. Critical communication breakdowns like these could have disastrous results and put our men and women in uniform at risk. To ensure America remains capable of combating threats wherever and whenever they occur, we not only need an unparalleled fighting force, but also a strong chain of command among our military's leadership that cannot be compromised. That's why I introduced the Securing the Chain of Command Continuity Act, alongside my colleague on the other side of the aisle, Congressman Davis of North Carolina, to prevent any similar chain of command breakdowns in the future and preserve the integrity of our national security. My bipartisan legislation would amend existing law to require all members of the National Security Council to notify the Executive Office of the President, the Comptroller General of the United States, and to each chamber of Congress within 24 hours of any planned or emergent medical incapacitation. In the event this notification does not occur, a comprehensive report must be submitted, providing transparency surrounding the incapacitation or related notification failure within 30 days.
Congresswoman Jen Kiggins, Republican from Virginia, on the House floor, referring to Congressman Don Davis, Democrat from North Carolina, also co-sponsoring this bill. It passed by voice vote and now heads to the Senate. The Army goes rolling along, played at the White House today as President Joe Biden presented the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy to the United States Military Academy Army Black Knights. The trophy is awarded to the Military Service Academy football team with the best regular record among Army, Navy, and Air Force.
Over the course of this season, you faced setbacks, doubts, and uncertainties. Critics counted you out, but you never gave up. You never quit. Game by game, play by play, you ground it out together. You beat Air Force, who was undefeated until you played them, forcing 6 turnovers and winning by 20 points. A month later, you beat Navy. Second year in a row. Today you're taking home West Point's 10th Commander-in-Chief trophy. You should be very proud. And I want you to know I'm proud of you too. Not just for the wins, but not just for those forced turnovers, although they're impressive, Coach, but because every game after you hang up that uniform, you immediately put on another uniform, one representing the United States of America. Everyone on the stage stepped up to serve, to lead, to join the long line of American servicemen, each a link in a chain of honor in America. You represent the very best of who we are as Americans. And I'm confident that in years to come, you'll be willing to you'll see the same toughness, tenacity, and camaraderie and accountability to our country that you brought to the field in every single game.
President Joe Biden at the White House presenting the Commander-in-Chief's Trophy, which was first awarded in 1972 by President Nixon. President Biden will be delivering the commencement address next month at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, as well as Morehouse College in Georgia. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter, word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.